Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Ben Cohen, senior analyst and rapid response director at the FDD. Ben, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be with you today.
Over the weekend, we saw a horrific anti-Semitic attack in Sydney, Australia. 2 gunmen opened fire on a Bondi Beach Hanukkah celebration that left at least 15 people dead and 29 others injured. So to start off the conversation, what is your reaction to this really horrible tragedy?
Well, I'm still personally reeling from the devastation, but I'm not at all surprised that this attack happened. And I think, if you look at what is being said in Australia, it's very clear that Jewish leaders, leaders of the Jewish community there, have been warning that an attack like this was pretty much inevitable, because you've had over the last 2 years in Australia, since the October the 7th, 2023 Hamas atrocity in Israel, you've had an upsurge of anti-Semitism that is intimately linked to the growth of the pro-Hamas solidarity movement in that country, and has essentially legitimized anti-Semitic ideas, anti-Semitic memes, anti-Semitic tropes. And so, in a sense, we've been on a torturous path for the last 2 years, and we've ended up with 15 people murdered at a menorah lighting ceremony on Bondi Beach.
I mean, it's just horrible what happened on Bondi Beach. You're saying you think that this was inevitable. A lot of people in the Jewish community in Australia share a similar sentiment. One person who was at the event, he said that the celebrants there were shocked at what had happened, but not entirely surprised. What do you think, then, Australian leadership should have done differently?
Well, I think there are measures that they could have taken on Sunday that would have mitigated the enormous risk there. For example, if you look at the video of the shooting, you'll see that the 2 gunmen were on a footbridge with a bird's eye view of the grassy area beneath them where the menorah lighting was taking place. It's an absolute mystery to me why that footbridge was accessible at that particular time, why there was no police guard. Again, if you look at the video, and there is one very long video of the shooting, it's more than 10 minutes before the police actually arrive in a position where they can disarm the shooters. So I think yesterday, the security arrangements around that particular event were clearly subpar and, enabled this attack to take place.
I mean, it's really horrific hearing people inside of Australia saying they're not safe, hearing people outside of Australia saying the Jewish community is not safe. Do you think that overall Jewish people are safe in Australia right now?
No, I don't. I don't think they're safe in Australia, nor do I think they are particularly safe in Canada, which is another Commonwealth country that has experienced a similar upsurge in anti-Semitism. I think the situation is extremely bad in Europe too. Both France and the United Kingdom have seen, several hundred anti-Semitic attacks, anti-Semitic outrages over the last 2 years. Not all of them, most of them do not come up to the level of a terrorist attack. We're talking verbal abuse, physical assaults, other forms of harassment. But there has been a strong build up of such incidents, and the net effect has been to leave those Jewish communities feeling deeply insecure. I think we're even seeing, sadly, here in the United States, a similar process. In some ways, the American Jewish community, which has, particularly for the last 80 to 90 years, led a life unparalleled in Jewish history. I think now they're experiencing a degree of Europeanization, in that they're feeling for the first time like a vulnerable minority.
And to your point, since October the 7th of 2023, there has been a global rise in anti-Semitism. I mean, what do you think global leaders need to be doing? I'm talking about Australia's Prime Minister, the President of the United States, leaders in Europe. What do you want to see from them?
Well, look, periodically you've had world leaders coming together to try to do something about anti-Semitism beyond just condemning it. In the wake of the 9/11 attacks, so we're going back, 20, 25 years, there was an initiative to combat this global rise in anti-Semitism. So the problem that we're dealing with is actually, at least 2.5 decades old. Anti-Semitism has been festering from the turn of the 21st century, and I would say, in its worst phase now. So I think what world leaders need to do is threefold. I think one, we need public education campaigns in every single country, explaining why anti-Semitism is bad. I think we also need leaders to come out more clearly and denounce not those who want to express sympathy and solidarity with the people of Gaza. That's an entirely legitimate thing to do in a democracy. But to really condemn the fact that this so-called solidarity movement that has, polluted our streets for the last 2 years with their regular demonstrations and other sort of manifestations of hate. This solidarity movement has been far more about targeting Jews than it has been about expressing solidarity with Palestinians. So I would like to see leaders and influencers more generally coming out and talking about the toxicity of what bills itself as the Palestine solidarity movement. And I think lastly, Jewish communities obviously need to boost yet again their receptiveness, their ability to deal with these kinds of security threats, and that means more security guards and more devices that will effectively make sure that every Jewish building is as secure as it can be.
I want to talk about something that Australia's Prime Minister said and then follow it up with something that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said. The Australian Prime Minister said this after the attack. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian, and every Australian tonight will be, like me, devastated on this attack on our way of life. There is no place for this hate, violence, and terrorism in our nation. Let me be clear, we will eradicate it. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he said that he sent Australia's Prime Minister a letter back in August saying that his government's policy was essentially promoting and encouraging anti-Semitism in Australia. And he said this too after the attack. Your government did nothing to stop the spread of anti-Semitism in Australia. He also added this. You took no action, you let the disease spread, and the result is the horrific attacks on Jews we saw today. What do you make of Netanyahu essentially assigning some of the blame there to Australia's Prime Minister?
I think he's absolutely right to do that. I think what you heard from Albanese yesterday was a pro forma condemnation. And by the way, worth pointing out, the first statement that he issued did not mention the words Hanukkah, Jews, or terrorism. So anybody reading his statement would have thought there was just some random gun attack on Bondi Beach. And I think that's because, Albanese is coming from a left-wing party, is dependent on the support of left-wing constituencies, and doesn't want to overly talk about anti-Semitism or how the pro-Palestine movement, the pro-Hamas movement, has stoked anti-Semitism. I think as well, Australia made a huge mistake in September of this year in recognizing an independent Palestinian state, and in doing so in the middle of a war and without the issue of Palestinian recognition of Israel being resolved, without really paying any attention to Hamas's declared intention of eliminating the state of Israel. So that was really Netanyahu described it, I think, at the time as pouring oil on the anti-Semitic flames, and I think there's some merit to that view. And I don't feel that the Albanese government is sincere in its bid to, as it says, to eradicate anti-Semitism. But more important than what I think, Australian Jews don't seem to feel that way either.
President Trump, though, he called it an anti-Semitic attack, obviously, is what he said. He condemned the shooting, and he had this message for Jewish Americans. He said this on Fox News in light of the attack. He said, celebrate proudly, be proud of who you are. I mean, what do you make of President Trump's response? And do you think right now Jewish Americans can celebrate proudly? What do you think that looks like for them?
Well, firstly, I think the president's response is the correct one. It is a laudable one. It should be something in a contented contented, tolerant society, it shouldn't be really necessary to have to express sentiments like that. But, in the wake of yesterday's attack, I think that was an important statement to make, and I'm glad that he made it. I think American Jews, they have had some really traumatic incidents over the last few years. And it goes back, if you remember back in 2018, we had a neo-Nazi gunman kill several people at a Shabbat service at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. So we have seen this in the last decade. In some ways, we were the canary in the coal mine with this sort of mass shooting incident. But I do think that there are two elements that separate American Jews from Jews in other countries outside Israel. One is simply the size of the community. The biggest Jewish community outside of Israel is here in the United States. And so I think there is some strength and some comfort and some solidarity in the sheer numbers, even though Jews are nonetheless a tiny overall percentage of the American population. I think secondly, Jews have seen an unprecedented surge of anti-Semitism over the last 2 years. And you just have to look at social media feeds to get a sense of the kinds of defamatory comments that are being made. But I think here in America, there is much more a sort of instinctive disgust, both amongst our elected politicians, but also amongst public opinion, because of the values on which our republic is based. And so there is more to fight for Jews in America, and I think they're aware of that. Jews in other countries may well, for very understandable reasons, be giving up on the countries where they live. I don't think American Jews are in that state yet, and so I think they're obviously going to be mourning throughout this week of Hanukkah because the Bondi Beach massacre will overshadow it, but they will also celebrate it proudly.
And I mean, it's just horrible, right? Such a tragic event, especially during a celebration. And the Jewish community around the world is in the midst of celebrating Hanukkah right now. So specifically, what are you looking out for next year?
Okay, so I think in terms of getting towards the end of the year and the end of the Hanukkah holiday, which will be beginning of next week, sadly, I can't discount the possibility that another event, mass atrocity like yesterday, will take place again. I don't think any of us can discount that. I think Jewish communities, both through their voluntary security services, and these voluntary security services exist in a number of countries. They have pretty good relations with law enforcement. So I think that beefing up security around Jewish institutions will be the priority for this week. I think going into next year and the sorts of themes that we're looking at, there is a possibility that the war in Gaza could erupt again. There is the possibility that Hamas will refuse to disarm, and that this will become the new cause célèbre for the pro-Hamas groups. So I think that the unraveling of a ceasefire in Gaza could well trigger another upsurge of the sorts of events that we've seen in 2024 and 2025.
Well, Ben, I appreciate you coming on today. And as we see possible developments of what's next, I hope you can join me again. Thank you so much. It's a really important conversation.
I'd be really happy to.